All right, good afternoon. Today we are looking at ancient Greek art. We're going to take the next couple of weeks to be looking at the ancient Greeks and how art evolved from that of what we saw of Egypt and Mesopotamia, and kind of take a look at how man's understanding of where he fits in the universe is kind of evolving as well. Today we're going to start by taking a look first at the curriculum that we are going to be addressing today. Um, our success criteria is we're going to be able to explain how human depiction and art changed throughout Greek art, the ancient Greek art. We're looking specifically today at the geometric period, the archaic period. We're going to look at how it changed from those Egyptian sort of very rigid figures to more naturalistic figures than the with the ancient Greeks. We're going to compare those changes in human portrayal. Architecture, we're going to look at how architecture evolved again from those Egyptians into the early part of the Greek, and then we're going to continue next week looking at how it evolved throughout that early Greek history. And again, demonstrating an understanding of how those perceptions of man's place in the world around him changed. Excuse me. Today you have a ancient Greek study guide. If you click this, it's going to take you to the page where you can download your worksheet today. You can either fill this out right there on your computer and then do a screenshot and submit it as a PNG or a JPEG, or you can print it out and actually write on it and draw on it and save it as a JPEG or PNG, or you can also just save it to your computer as a document, fill it out as a document, and submit it as a document. And you'll do that also on the same page right next to where you found the study guide. Once you finish it, you'll click submit assignment. When you click this submit assignment, oh, I'm in the oh, ah, sorry about that. When you click the submit assignment, let's try this again here. It'll take you to this assignment submission page. Only yours will say submit here, and again, you can choose a PNG, JPEG, or doc file to submit for that assignment. The video link for today's lesson will be right here once it's done and recorded and saved. If for any reason you can't attend class, you can always click those and watch those at your leisure. So let's take a look at today's module. And again, if you need to go in the module, it's always right there, that first button. So our objective, ancient Greek culture has endured and influenced multiple cultures and government. Democracy's origin, we wouldn't have democracy if it weren't for the ancient Greeks. Philosophy, we had Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Drama, Sophocles, Euripides, Aristophanes. I don't know about that one. Literature, you had Homer and Sappho. Science, mathematics, Pythagoras, Hippocrates, Euclid, Archimedes, and even athletes in the Olympics. Olympics came from ancient Greek, of course. The Greeks differed from the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians. Egyptian culture evolved or revolved around the exaltation of their godlike rulers and obsession with preparations for afterlife. So remember, when we talked about the Egyptians, Mesopotamians just a week ago, we were talking about how everything they did was in honor of gods or deities that uh, the rulers that they treated like deities and gods. And so it really wasn't about the human experience. It was about this godlike experience, really, in the afterlife that awaited them. Mesopotamians seem to be immersed in expressions of military might, yet the ancient Greeks focused on humanity. We're also going to see that the Greeks start off with a little focus um, on war, just a little bit, but yeah, we're going to see that shifting to humanity, the idea that man is more important than maybe the government or even some of those deities that they had uh, exalted during those Egyptian Mesopotamian areas we studied. The Greek mind was centered on humanity, its hopes and fears, its triumphs and failures, its potential and depravity. Greek gods represented this by encompassing the same virtues and vices of humanity when represented by human Man is the measure of all things. Man served as the subject, the norm, and the goal of ancient Greek thought. The ultimate aim of ancient Greek endeavors was reaching the mental, physical, and creative potential of man. And so we're going to see reflected in sculptures, all these big athletic sculptures and so forth. Uh, Despite large cultural advancements, the ancient Greeks were not without fault. Democracy was limited to only one section of the populace. Not everybody got to participate. Slavery was practiced and encouraged, and women were treated as inferior human beings. The struggle still goes on, ladies. The viciousness with which the independent Greeks city-states warred with one another was tremendous and a deterrent. Um, so we're going to look today specifically at that geometric, the archaic period. Next week we're going to look at classical through Hellenistic. And so we're looking at 900 BCE to really the mid 400 BCE time. The historical highlights: you had the Greek alphabet. Oddly enough, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, xi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, upsilon, phi, chi, psi, omega. That's the Greek alphabet. I know every one of it. Homer, the first Olympics, limited democracy developed, and the Persian War. These are some of the highlights of this particular time. All right. Also, as we're going through this module, I'm going to kind of take a moment to step back and look at occasion on our um, little PowerPoint here that's going to help you out with answering some of those questions that are on your study guide. And so you'll see these aren't exactly what you've got, but close enough that you should be able to figure out a little bit what's going to go there. We're going to take a moment to stop and talk about all these in just a few minutes. Greek geometric period of art. As we saw at the end of the ancient Aegean study, the Dorians brought an end to Hellenic, the Mycenaean culture, and Greece entered into a period of cultural darkness. By the end of the 9th century BCE, the region started to climb out of its isolation and regain its economic prosperity. It was about this time the new art form emerged. It's based on angular geometric schemes for which the geometric period of ancient Greek art is named. Most common motif was meander or Greek fret. A fret is a decoration, usually in bands, consisting of interlocking geometric lines. Figures appeared later, but they were highly stylized, unrefined, and exhibited unnatural proportions. Very similar to what the Egyptians. So we're seeing this evolution from these geometric, rigid figures. If we remember the Egyptians, even as they got more naturalistic, they didn't look like natural people yet. They were getting there, but we still saw those very stylized, unrefined, unnatural proportions. Remember, the shoulders were really wide and hips were really narrow, and everything was very very stylized. Same with the Greeks. Now, not exactly the same style, but very stylized, simplified, and but approaching that naturalistic depiction of human. Pottery was utilitarian, which means it had a purpose and it was designed to be used for something. It wasn't just decorative. Way that scholars are able to date ancient Greek potteries to analyze the increased figural details on the craters, which were used as grave markers. The figures on the pottery are nude and typical of Greek obsession with glorifying humanity. They are representative of athletes who competed in the nude. Orientalizing art between 700 and 600 BCE, through the trade, the ancient Greeks became increasingly involved with the cultures of Egypt and the Near East and the Eastern cultures, which is how we get those influences coming from Egypt. Um, the Corinthian Greeks developed what is called the black figure vase painting. In this technique, dark figures were silhouetted against a light background, the color of clay, and then the details and colored highlights were added within the silhouetted forms of the striking effect. This technique made Greek pottery a much sought after commodity in the Eastern Mediterranean, resulting in a wealth and influence. So, because they had these goods that people wanted to trade for, it brings them economic success, and the economic success builds that cultural success. The Corinthian black figured, I'm not even going to try that one. Oenoch, or wine jug, represents both animals of the East, such as the Sphinx and the lion, and intricate floral designs, which indicate a strong Oriental influence. The concentric bands are characteristic of the geometric period, but demonstrate the impact of the East. So, understanding when we talk about being able to discuss what was the process, what was the progress, the evolution, As how did we get to these naturalistic forms where the body's being depicted as it really looks? Well, it didn't happen all at once. We go from those very stylized Egyptian, um, where they were even making the most important figure really big, proportion was all jacked up, but they had these simplified figures, and we're seeing that kind of make its way into the Greek. We've got these bands, things are done in bands, still very much like storytelling, almost like what we saw in those Egyptian hieroglyphics as they use those for storytelling as well. But we're beginning to see that approach to that naturalistic. As Greek culture evolved through the geometric and Orientalized period, there was an evidence of their debt to the Egyptian imagery and style. We just talked about that. We got to give them some credit, the Egyptians credit for bringing that in. But forms became increasingly detailed and energetic, and classical and Hellenistic periods individualized the Greek culture and artistic accomplishments as they stylistically departed from the influence of Egypt. In other words, the heck with you, Egypt. We're moving along, and so we're going to see that as we get through this archaic period, and we're going to talk about in just a moment, and we get into that classical and Hellenistic next week, you're going to see a much bigger progress of um, that evolution. You are answering these questions instead of submitting all this twice. You're just submitting. There's one assignment. It looks like there's two or three built in here. If you did it the way they did it, I don't know why they'll have you submit stuff twice. So we're doing that one handout. You're submitting one assignment for this week. Um, there will be going in the future times when we're going to take a look at some homework that y'all work on independently. You may have two assignments during those weeks, but right now you just have the one. The next period of ancient Greek was the Archaic, which means early in Greek. It was one of the most creative and innovative periods. In this dynamic period, the ancient Greek art underwent a rapid evolution, established norms that would span generations. Well, let's go back here because we're going to examine how the portrayal of the human figure of the Greek art evolves from abstraction to representative. We're going to connect the evolution of Greek art and how it parallels the evolution of the Greek culture. So, how did their perceptions, their mindset of the Greek culture change, and how is that represented through art? And then understand the function of sacred objects and buildings. We're going to focus on architecture throughout this course. Kuros, archaic sculptors were noted for their freestanding statutory sculptures of the popular subjects of the kuros, masculine for youth, and kor, the feminine form. These works were used as grave markers, ceremonial dedications, and votive statues. The kuros was always represented nude, and the core figure always clothed. Kuros recovered from the Volamandra dating from the middle of the 6th century is evident the Egyptian influence in the frontal, block-like form of the extended left foot. The remaining geometric period traits are the triangular torso, oversized head, and smallish waist. So think about this a little bit. If you look at that figure, he's not naturalistic. Uh, those shoulders are still a little too broad and square. Waist is still a little too small to be fully representative. If you'll remember again, we talked about those are the Egyptians. Mesopotamians had those figures, particularly the Egyptians had those very wide shoulders, very narrow hips. So even though they were even more angular, they didn't have the curves that showed the shoulders and everything. They were very angular. Um, we still see some of that influence. It's going away. We're getting rid of it, but it's still there a little bit. Proportions of muscles are more natural and better defined. A new feature that would be characterized in sculptures of this period is called the Archaic Smile. It's this kind of fake smile that you see on everything that um, sort of represents, I guess, the contentment, how content they all were to be human. And from the early part of the Archaic period to the beginning of the Classical period, we'll see that. A stylistic element known as progression in the Archaic period is that Kuros is nude and freed from the stone, meaning that there is space between the legs, the arms, and the body. The Egyptians sought permanence, so stone was left in these places to ensure the stability, but the Greeks idolized freedom and motion, so the stone was removed. So, couple things to point out here. Artistically speaking, that's more difficult. Anytime you're freeing the figure from the stone, I got to study in Italy for a summer and see the studio of Michelangelo, and it was remarkable how many broken pieces of sculpture were laying around because You get to an arm and you're freeing it from the stone, and it decides to free itself from the sculpture. Um, so, from an artistic point of view, it's more difficult, but that kind of also demonstrates how important it was to them that they try to as accurately as realistically begin to approach that representation of human beings. Female figures became more naturalistic as the 6th century progressed. The peplos core is named for a simple garment known as a peplos. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. She was recovered from beneath the ancient pavement of the Acropolis and still had traces of paint, which is evident of how Greeks always painted their sculptures. And if you ever get to study in Greece and Rome, uh, anywhere that they've got any of these ancient Greek and Roman sculptures, you'll see that none of them have paint to this day because paint was quick to erode and wear off. Whereas these things are stone, they're going to be here for a long, long time. Again, they're pointing out the evolution of how even this depiction of the female character changed. You can see not only that arm kind of coming out and becoming um, uh, more freed from the stone, if you will, but the depiction of the drapery, the clothing, is becoming more naturalistic. We see the folds a little better. We see the gravity pulling that fabric almost as it can be seen. From its natural proportions, gently flowing hair and frames the nearly perfect oval face, the natural folds of drapery, it's evident from the archaic influence that are nearly gone and we're drawn to the new period. And we can see the smile is kind of fading away and we're getting more of a naturalistic look in the face. This is kind of a small, wish we could see that a little bigger. But again, looking at how naturalistic the clothing itself was depicted. Vase painting. Again, the sculpture we have, the pottery stuff, very utilitarian. It wasn't just there to uh, look good; it was there to perform a function. Uh, Exechius, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that one right, regarded as the finest of the black figured vase painters, produced Achilles left and Ajax playing dice. The vases depict warriors who find a moment of recreation between battles. The bands and all other links to the geometric period are replaced with detail and intricacy, which is seen in the warriors' hair, beards, capes, and shields, the heroes' names written above their heads, and written dice call coming from their mouths, and conjunction and with the dissipating composite view is evident in progression. The departure from the composite view. I butchered that sentence, and I apologize. The arched backs of Achilles and Ajax conform to the culture and the amphora, as does the purposeful space between the warriors. The spears also direct the eyes of the viewer to the roll of the dice. And so, when we look at these figures and how they're depicted, we still see those influences of those Egyptians and the Mesopotamian area. We see again the torsos very big. That guy's chest here on the left and the bottom left we see is much larger. The waist is very small. Again, sort of those Egyptian influences in the way that it's being depicted. But it's really what they're doing that's very humanistic. It's the subject that they're depicting itself, as opposed to the Egyptians who were all about gods and stuff. This is what human beings are doing. Not only just battle, but what we do, we're not battling. It's kind of this is this equivalent today of social media. What are you doing on Thursday? And what these guys are doing in between their battles and so forth. Let's see. Oh, did we go back too far? What did I do there? We're on four. I've been having a little trouble with Canvas lately. If you've been having the same, let me know. Greek temple basics. Most of the earliest Greek structures were built with mud, brick, and wood and did not survive. However, the beginning of the Archaic period, the Greeks began building in stone, and this is awesome because we have a lot of stuff to take a look at from them because of that. Influenced by the great columned halls of Egypt, Archaic Greeks started constructing columned stone temples with double-sloped roofs. The Greeks' temple was not a place of public worship, but a home for the cult statues dedicated to the deity that the building was built to honor. So the Greeks are still kind of honoring those gods early on, and they're building these temples and so forth. But we see architecturally they're picking up those columns from the Egyptians, and we're going to see how uh, though they take it and really run with it. And we're going to one of the things we're going to focus on is specifically those columns. There are many varieties of Greek temples that follow the same basic plan. The variations on a theme illuminated the ancient Greek idea of proportion, balance, symmetry. They strove for a 2-1 ratio width to length. The Greeks who actually came up with Pythagoras came up with what we call the golden ratio. I think it's a 1.1 to 1.6 something, which is makes a really ideal um, format for painting art. It's what the eye likes to look at most, that type of thing. The general plan for canonical Greek temples or structures that follow a particular canon had the following: a windowless cella or naos, at the center of which was a cult statue, a front porch, or the pronos, which is usually enclosed between columns and extended walls. The ante or the back porch. Oh my goodness, the opus thotimus. Goodness Greeks. Couldn't you make things a little easier? Which had no function but simply provided balance and symmetry, and the level of which the column would rest of the stylobate. Most of the temples had a colonnade, various kinds as well. Pro-style, the columns across the front porch only. The amphistyle, the columns across the back porch, and the peristyle, the columns around the cella. And so, what we're going to be looking at today is specifically how we can identify different periods of Greek architecture by looking at some of the more obvious differences in these different periods. And the quickest way to look at, we're going to look at all four of these, but the quickest way is to look at the columns. And so we're going to talk about that in just a moment. So understanding the platforms of the stylobates, that was the base pretty much that everything sat on. We had the columns, the superstructures. Um, These were where the tablatures were located. The frieze where you would see different maybe battles being depicted, that sort of thing, and then the cornice as well, which is the top of the pediment. And so if we take a look here, we're going to look at sort of what we're talking about. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Oh, I'm going to do that shit. Okay. So first of all, let's go back here. I guess we're just going to, they only have the Ionic Doric. So on your sheet, you've got, and I'll pull this up so you all can see it as well. Nope. This is the one you all got, and I'll pull it up on mine as well. But you can see on yours, this is where you're going to be able to describe these. You should be doing this now. So when we look at what the difference is between those columns, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, and we're going to be talking more about the time periods that they represent in just a second. We'll kind of go back and look at those. When we talk about when we were in school, they would always say Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, and just kind of identifying that Doric often had a very simple round abacus or the cap to um, their column. Ionic often had these little curled sides. They look like serifs at the top of an I, if you will, the letter I. And then the Corinthian had a very sort of ornate look to the top of that column. And so we can look at those and quickly identify sort of what period of architecture is being represented. Um, we're going to talk more about this Greek mindset, most important thing, in just a second. All right. Oh, okay. The Temples of Hera is a monstrous Doric structure whose peripheral colonnade still survives. The builders placed the columns very close and created the illusion that they swell towards the middle, known as entasis. The huge flattened echinus is characteristic of the early Doric capital. These traits are a result of builders' concerns about supporting the entablature. And so, one of the things the Greeks were big on was this was going to last forever. Overkill. These columns are enormous. They're huge. Uh, really begin to get a strong foundational understanding of architecture and how you can create and build um, structures that are going to last for eternity. And 6th century Doric temples evolved as Greek artists of the period were striving for proportionality and moving away from encumbrance. The iconic temples of sanctuary of Delphi on the Greek mainland was in the religious center of the ancient Greek world and considered to be the center of the world. The Panhellenic all-Greek site was filled with works dedicated to various and often competing Greek city-states. Most notable, the treasuries would hold offerings in respective city-states. All right, and so last but not least, we're going to talk about the treasury. We're going to kind of skip over this a little bit. What I do want to kind of point out is in these friezes, what we see going on are these two-dimensional surfaces that have these raised, what we call relief images. Whenever we see that a two-dimensional surface, which we're going to look at from the front, it's not designed to be looked at in the round, has these relief images on them, carved in this three-dimensional shape. The artists are trying to give us that impression of that three-dimensional space and to kind of enhance that storytelling. And we see these as a typical attribute to most of that Greek early Greek sculptures, where we see whether it's depiction of battles, the gods, the deities that these buildings were intended to represent, and then just like with the other aspects of Greek art, we see it kind of evolving to humanistic. So let's take a look at our handout. How did Egyptian art influence the Greek art? And so we've talked about a few different ways. We reflect on the focus of society, shifting from those religion and gods to humanity. Hopefully, you've already got this filled out, but if you haven't, you need to be scribbling away. Shifting representation of human beings, again, from that ideal to the more humanistic. The Greek architecture is influenced by the columned halls of the Egyptians. Again, architecture even goes back to the Egyptians. We're going to see how they influenced. Betrayal of the human figure in Greek art evolved from abstraction to representative. Remember, we saw the torsos going from those very simplistic and geometric designs to more elegant, simplistic, more elegant, realistic representations of the human figure. Those very athletic, starting to get those athletic male figures that were always nude, the clothed female figures that were becoming more flowing, if you will. Oh, in what ways did Greek art parallel the evolution of Greek culture? Well, again, the Greek art followed closely along those changing perception of man's place in the world as the Greeks began to evaluate the individual and value them over the collective or those gods and the deities. The evolving ideas about man were reflecting that independence the Greek artists found in depicting the human form. So think about freeing that figure from the stone to depict how they started seeing themselves as more independent in the world. And the Greek temple was not a place of public worship, but a home for cult statues dedicated to the deity that the building was intended for. Last but not least, what's the most important concept of Greek art? Well, the Greek mindset on humanity. The Greek gods represented this by encompassing the same virtues and vices humanity represented as human. Man is the measure of all things. So understanding that this was the whole cultural mankind, the perception of man and where he was in the world is evolving and changing very rapidly, very quickly, and in enormous ways, going from one extreme to the other. And so that's sort of the main idea that we're going to follow along with as we go through these modules. All right, guys, let's have a great day.